thank you very much, man. Thanks for being here.
Delighted to be.
I'm excited about hearing more about your story. We spoke a little bit today. We do a bit of a preamble and we chat about your life a little bit, but I want to get into it a bit more deeper here with this audience. So I like to start at the beginning, when you're a wee boy in England. So tell us a little bit about that and where that bug for entrepreneurship maybe started.
Yeah, grew up with an immigrant family, obviously Indians in England, and there was just an entrepreneurial drive that sort of existed, I think. My dad was actually a car designer for Ford, but had a side hustle where he'd go to London and buy all sorts of random things from wholesalers like jeans and briefcases and watches and then sell them in Ford Motor Company. And then within a year, he had a network of people selling products across Europe for him, and he was making a lot more money from his side hustle than his day job. So kind of it inspired me a little bit. And then, of course, growing up in England, both Matt and I both idolized Richard Branson, who is, there aren't a lot of great entrepreneurial success stories in the UK. Mm-hmm. It's not like the US that's just full of them. But Richard was very inspiring just in terms of what he was able to do and how he was able to build so many brands. And so around 11 or 12, I was in high school. I wanted a bit of pocket money. I had a bit of a bad candy habit. Used to go to bargain basement bins in record stores and go buy heavy metal records, which was my music of choice back then. Still like it, but have a bit more varied taste now. But I used to go buy records that I knew my friends would like and then go sell them for a 300% profit in school, and it did pretty well for an 11-year-old. So that was my first taste of entrepreneurship and capitalism.
I think people don't realise how important someone like Richard Branson was to British young boys who wanted to start entrepreneurship, because in the UK, I brought this up, and a lot of the people in the audience here will not get this reference, but Del Boy. Del Boy was a character on a TV show, wasn't he?
Only Fools and Horses.
Only Fools and Horses, and he was seen as a bit of a scammer.
A wheeler dealer.
A wheeler and dealer. I don't know if that even makes sense to you guys, but a bit of a trier. And so Richard Branson was like the first entrepreneur that people would look up to. Because entrepreneurship in the UK, I feel, is very looked down upon because of characters like Del Boy. And for me, that was what Richard Branson meant to me. And it's interesting, the synergy between you and Richard. I hope that's flattering, because he started off in the record industry as well with
he's done it a little bit better than I have, though, Matt.
Virgin Megastores. But he got in hot water with his records. He did some sketchy stuff with records in his early days. So you got into the heavy metal record sales, and you did that for a bit, and you were like only 11 years old. But then you sort of like put down the entrepreneurship for a bit to go into education and find your path that way first.
Indeed, yeah. Again, growing up in an immigrant family, there was sort of a lot of pressure to go to the right schools, and so I'm kind of a bit overeducated at this point. But anyway, I look back in it and had some good takeaways from it, but I ended up with 3 degrees, which is probably too many.
Just too many. One too many, maybe. So you most of that was in the UK, but then that transition brought you to the United States for your graduate program. Yeah. And then did you just stay there here after that? Where was that? San Francisco? Did you say?
I went to Stanford for grad school. Then I joined a consulting firm called Bain. Went back to London with them, actually to work in London for about a year and a half, and then out to Hong Kong. Did a stint in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. And then I went to business school in Boston before coming down to Austin and joining the tech sector. I did a brief summer on Wall Street and realized that I didn't like investment banking. I did a bit of time in the private equity group where I liked investing, but I always wanted to be the person on the other side of the table building something. I think as an entrepreneur, the thing that really has always driven me is the idea of seeing a problem that maybe other people don't see yet and having a solution and then seeing it come to life. That to me is the most compelling aspect of company building. And then the second thing is building teams. Nikhil and I worked together for a long time at Convio, and seeing people grow, seeing people do well is also super motivating. But for me, the idea of like taking something from idea to reality is really motivating.
And that's just the bug of an entrepreneur. We can't help but see a problem and want to fix it.
Yeah.
And so you did a lot of consultancy stuff, which you must have learned a ton, and investment banking. So was then the next obvious step to go into entrepreneurship, or was there something in between?
You know, I don't know if it was highly systematic and planned. I mean, I think I was risk averse for a large portion of my life until I was about 26, 27, 28. So I came down to Austin. I was recruited by this software company called Trilogy that recruited a lot of good people back then. And honestly, I was a complete misfit for the culture. They had excellent people there. Don't want to take away from it. But I believe in speaking my mind. I'm not one of these people who just like follows party rules. And I remember I was in a big company meeting, and the CEO was kind of criticizing how the marketing team had taken this new product that they launched to a conference and how they had spent $1 million and generated like $15,000 in sales. And I was like, okay, we're criticizing the marketing, but no one's actually done fundamental research to see if this product is needed. And they were trying to take like a down market version of Ariba or a supply chain software. And I was like, I thought that was acceptable to like speak up in a meeting, because that's just how I was raised, to not be quiet. And that's the culture I believe in, but I got fired after that. And so, Was
that an American company?
It was, yeah. And the great thing about it was that I was just living this risk-averse life up until
you were lying to yourself. I think.
I was doing all the safe things, working in consulting, getting overly educated, and really what I wanted to do was, take a risk, but it took getting fired to take that first risk.
It often does take that push. After this, I'll maybe tell you what gave me the push. Richard, it was a push for me to go into entrepreneurship properly. And we all need that little push sometimes to go to entrepreneurship. And so you got fired. Congratulations, that was a good step. So then, did you go and get another job straight after that?
No,
that's it, I'm done.
I was like, I have a low burn rate. I have time. And it was 1998, and it was a heady time. Those of you who were here in the startup community then, here in the Bay Area, I mean, it just seemed like anything was possible. And it was.
Yeah.
In fact, I had 3 friends who started companies around the same time as me, too, in California when I was here. We had a bet to see how many $1 million you could raise per PowerPoint slide. I raised $4.6 million on, I think, 20 slides, and my friend raised 8 on 4 slides, so he beat me.
Yeah.
But it was actually easy to raise money back then. Way harder now.
Yeah.
And it just felt like abundance and opportunity. And how could you fail? How could you not try? At least you could fail, but it just seemed like I needed to try. And so I was very methodical. I had an idea came to me. My first company, Convio, was a platform to help nonprofits use the internet for fundraising, and I had done a volunteer stint at a public TV station that gave me the idea for how broken fundraising was in terms of how charities raise money. And but I interviewed literally hundreds of people in the nonprofit sector before I started the company. And then a lot of the early days, the struggles were really about team building. I had never really led people before in a material way, and just recruiting engineers and just leading small teams, etc. There was a lot to learn. So, but that ended up being sort of a really good it ended up being a home run, that company. A home run over 12 years. So it wasn't like an immediate hit.
Yeah. I call them a 10-year overnight success.
Yeah, and I think that's true for most entrepreneurship. I envy the entrepreneurs who are like able to come up with something and then flip it in a year or two. But for most of us, it's a grind. And you can have a really good idea, but it still takes time to kind of navigate and find out how to find product market fit. And also sometimes timing is an issue. I think one of my best skills as an entrepreneur is I can see things before other people, but sometimes I see things too early.
Yeah.
And so then the market has to catch up to where you are.
Mm-hmm. You have to, and can you live it out, or are you going to die before the market gets there?
Can you stretch the capital, etc.? Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a successful exit. You exited that company.
We took it public on NASDAQ, and then we were acquired for $325 million by a company called Blackboard in South Carolina.
But you weren't done there. You couldn't just leave it there.
No, I mean, I was still pretty young, and once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur, right? In terms of wanting to kind of apply yourself and solve other problems. Convio was a B2B company. We served B2B2C in that we were a platform for nonprofits, but we helped them interface to their consumers. So if you've ever been solicited by a friend for American Cancer, American Diabetes, or anything like that, that was all our software. Nice. We powered the donation pages for a lot of these big charities,
That's really
cool. But I really wanted to do something in the consumer space because I'd done something kind of vertical market focused for such a long time, and I had a lot of consumer ideas. And one of my friends who actually ended up backing my next company said, Vinay, you don't know anything about consumer tech. You're going to get killed by some kids out of Google or Facebook, right? Yeah, you've got interesting ideas, but you don't understand how to kind of operate in that environment. So I took his advice seriously and kind of said, okay, well, how do I do something that plays to my strengths in B2B, but has that consumer flavor that I was so curious about kind of having some kind of consumer interface. And that, along with just what I saw in growing Convio, where we struggled to buy technology and we made some really bad mistakes, led me to kind of the TrustRadius idea.
So you would classify TrustRadar as a consumer-facing product then?
We're a two-sided marketplace. So we have 12 million consumers who use our platform every year. And by consumers, I mean people in the workplace, not home consumers. But the simple theory was, I need to put the mic up. The simple theory was, when I started the company back in 2012, as consumers in our personal lives, everything that we did in terms of picking a hotel, a restaurant, or making a purchase had benefited from consumer reviews and transparency, right? There was this big, bright light shone on a product or a service. It was really hard to hide if you had a good or a bad service. Yeah. But in the B2B world, markets were still really opaque.
Yeah.
Right. We bought at Convio a piece of software that cost us $200,000, rolled it out to our team of 450 people, and then realized after we'd done that it was a bad fit, and we couldn't get out of the contract, and we couldn't roll it back, and there's a lot of egg on the face of the people who bought it. And I thought, as I started to talk to people around town, I realized we weren't the only ones who were crappy at buying software. Other people were too. Yeah. And that sort of led to that idea. But the whole idea of TrustRadius was create a platform for the buyer or the consumer to kind of help themselves through crowdsourcing information from peers, but then obviously find a monetization model that made sense, and that meant tapping into the sort of the brand and the vendor side of the marketplace.
Yeah, it's interesting that you describe it as more of a consumer-facing product. I would have thought it would be described more as a B2B product, but that makes a lot of sense. And so did you, apart from that time you were burnt by buying a piece of software that didn't work out, were you inspired by things like Trustpilot that were for the consumer? Have you heard of Trustpilot before? There's consumer reviews things.
I wouldn't say Trustpilot. I would say TripAdvisor. Yeah. I think there's a lot of issues with Trustpilot, honestly.
There's reviews.co.uk now and stuff like that. There's a few others.
The only platform that I thought was really good was TripAdvisor, honestly, because I love to travel. And I felt it sort of was a great resource. I used it a lot, but I felt it could be better. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, I swim, and when you go to a hotel, you don't want to know that they have a pool. You want to know if it's a lap pool versus a kiddie pool. Yeah. And that's one example. And then secondly, just feeling that it was really hard to actually pass through all the content to find specific answers. And so when we birthed TrustRadius, a lot of our thinking was we're dealing with complex B2B products. The standard cannot be a consumer review. It has to be a lot more robust. But what can we learn from consumer review sites that they do well, and what did they do poorly? And what they did poorly was they didn't have granular filters. The content was unstructured. And so we built TrustRadius with that in mind, to give people the ability to kind of find specific information about a product a lot more quickly. And a lot more emphasis on, we're dealing with complexity. We want to simplify that complexity for people.
I don't know the answer to this, that's why I want to answer it. Like, where did you sit in the evolution of these B2B review softwares, such as G2 and the Gartner roll-ups and stuff that happened?
So Gartner, the companies that you're referring to, Capterra and Software Advice and GetApp that Gartner acquired, they'd been in existence for about 10 years before I started.
And they were an Austin company, some of those were?
One of them was. One was Virginia, one was European. They actually started as directories doing lead arbitrage. So basically playing the SEM game, search engine marketing game, where they could buy clicks and then they would sell them for more than they bought them. And they actually built a phenomenal business, but I had a lot of issues with their business model.
Was that before you started?
That was before I started, yeah. They didn't even have reviews back then. They added reviews after we started having reviews. They copied us. So they're a really good business, and if you're purely focused on like commercial gain, they probably have a better business model than I do. The truth is, though, I'm a sucker for like doing the right thing. You know, I started a non-profit tech company for God's sake, right? So I don't like doing things purely for commercial gain. I like to do things that where I can go home and I don't feel like I have to take a shower from my day's work. And so a lot of those businesses operated in a way that I didn't feel comfortable with. They were basically software advice, for example. If you've seen the movie Boiler Room, okay, where they're trying to flip stocks to people where they shouldn't buy them, it's kind of like that. They have a site which, you know, says, would you like to speak to a consultant? And it's not a consultant, it's an SDR. And then they say, we think you should use this software. And then they flip you as a lead to 3 brands who are not a fit for you, but who are paying them for that lead. And I didn't want to build a business like that. I didn't want to, and Capterra, you pay to move up the rankings. You pay for your placement.
I've been a customer of that.
It works, it generates leads, but it's kind of
it's got more and more costly as well. Like PPC, the world is changing a bit. So I own a B2B SaaS company.
Yeah.
And we've found it harder and harder to make PPC affordable and make things like Get App and things like that affordable to make work.
So, you know, again, I don't want to knock anything about how good a business they are, because I think they've got a great business model. But
I guess I'm interested in, like, how you see the market going.
For me personally, you know, as an entrepreneur, life isn't just about pure profit maximization. I want to do well. I want to have financial gain, but I also want to sleep at night and feel good about the service I'm providing to people. So my ethos with TrustRadius was I wanted to be the trusted provider, the quality provider that actually helps people make good decisions. G2 is the closest to us in that respect in terms of not being completely pay for play like the others. But their model is really around sort of scale and volume. And it's good if you're going to, you know, like try and shortlist a product and figure out who to look at. But because the content isn't robust and because the data gets corrupted by how vendors play with them, it means you can't really rely on that data or that content to make a decision. So again, I'm a bit of an idealist in that respect, that I always wanted to build something that I could truly be proud of, where I felt I was genuinely helping people make an informed decision on the buy side.
That's lovely. So what are some of the shifts that you've seen in the B2B SaaS market? Because I feel like a bit before this, we were talking a little bit about things I've seen. So just I want to keep that open.
The biggest thing is, I mean, if you take it back to a decade ago, right, or even 15 years ago, most software was bought by the CIO's office, and the fact that now it's completely decentralized, not just to business functions, but to people on the front lines who can do a free pilot or try, like, you know, obviously companies like Slack pioneered the whole idea of like software being spread from a function into the enterprise. The whole product-led growth model. That's one big trend. The proliferation of applications to meet niche needs, right? The first vertical market we covered was MarTech. You know, there are probably 10,000 different MarTech applications at this point.
Marketing technology.
Marketing technology.
MarTech,
I mean, just the sprawl and the proliferation of software is almost insane. Some of it's been driven by, you know, how purchasing has been decentralized, and how SaaS has made it a lot more economic to develop software, and capital is relatively free. But there's always an entrepreneur trying to kind of create a net new thing that's a slightly better version or more tailored version. So you see this massive proliferation. You and I talked earlier about there is a move in some markets towards consolidation, where if you look at the sales engagement space and the conversational intelligence space, like products like Gong and Chorus and Outreach and Salesreach and Salesloft, they're all kind of converging and now doing the same thing and trying to get people to buy these monolithic platforms. But I don't think buyers necessarily want that. I think a lot of people still want best-of-breed applications. But it just depends on the market as to what makes sense. And then, of course, the big shift we're seeing today is the heavy investment in AI, and just how transformative that is in terms of areas like customer support, right? You know, changing the whole model around how knowledge is managed, not just internally but externally as well. I mean, we're only at the precipice of the AI revolution right now. There's a lot more to come.
It is interesting. I think I read an article once. It was called the repackaging or unpackaging of software, because it was about maybe 10 years ago that we saw, like you said, there was HubSpot that were always trying to do everything, but Zendesk acquired they acquired like a few. They they obviously Zendesk did support, but they acquired a CRM, and then I think Intercom did something similar, and there was a few of these people that wrapped up other apps into there, so they became the one solution, and we saw that happen quite a lot, I think, didn't we? So do you think we're going to keep seeing that, or we're going to see, again, best-in-class solutions start to separate?
I think it's going to be both. I mean, I think I see, you'd think the CRM space is saturated at this point, but I see new CRM companies getting born all the time because someone thinks they can do it better, or it's a more vertical specialized solution. So you see proliferation of new solutions. Someone's coming up with a better version of something. I mean, the conversation intelligence space, Gong's like the clear market leader, but I'm seeing new products emerge in that market all the time, and someone's going to come up with something that has a better edge, that does something better, and eventually you kind of go through that cycle. I mean, I think that's one of the beautiful things about tech and about entrepreneurship is that you always have to be on offense and defense, right? There's always some entrepreneur who's going to be coming up with something that could threaten you. Think of what HubSpot's done to Salesforce, right? People thought that Salesforce was indestructible, but HubSpot's eating their lunch right now. It's funny,
things like Salesforce, their little slogan was no software, or the little cross or something. They've become what they were railing against in a way.
Yeah.
It's funny how that happens. I think HubSpot have come a long way, but now I think you're seeing things like Zoho being more affordable, and people want something more affordable because these bills are getting quite high, aren't they, for these solutions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you seeing different people in the organization buying the software than before? Because I've heard terms like this before. I don't know if you've heard of this before, but like shadow IT.
Yeah.
I heard this. We work with the Walmart team, and we heard this term shadow IT, where this is when they circumvent the IT team and you go to an operations person or something. Are you seeing these sort of things?
Yeah, that's extremely common. And it's one of the biggest problems for larger enterprises to contend with. And even at a company of our size, it's an issue, right? We're trying to get it all under control because people are putting things on credit cards, and we did an audit of the software. I think we had 200 different pieces of software internally, and we're a 62-person company. It's like, how do you have 200 pieces of software across 62 people? But yes, it's crazy how much proliferation there is. Again, because there are specific software designed for niche purposes. But one thing that gives me is security, that people will need TrustRadius, because when there's so much choice of software, and the consequences of making a bad software choice can be expensive, or can at least be costly in terms of your time. Getting good advice before you buy is always going to be important.
Interesting. I think I'm just actually thinking this right now, like where there's people, like you say, more people who have access to a company credit card and are buying these softwares, and hopefully is there more of a move into like companies seeing what softwares they're buying and reviewing whether they're any good, or whether they're being used? Kind of, you see that in the consumer market now, don't you, where you're seeing all the subscriptions you're signed to. Businesses kind of do the same thing.
Yeah, there's a whole category of spend management software that is monitoring kind of what's been purchased, but also monitoring utilization, and also doing things like monitoring seat utilization, so for seat-based products and so forth. I mean, there's a whole ecosystem of products around that now. And pricing transparency, years ago, pricing was really opaque in the tech market, and then people like Vendor are trying to make it a lot more transparent as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, a lot of entrepreneurial patterns are, one thing happens in B2C and then it crosses over to B2B. So a lot of the things that we saw in B2B about pricing, transparency, reviews, try before you buy, those things they've just flown to B2B. So it hasn't really been that hard to predict what would happen.
Do you think we're going to see a big shift, though, with like the advent of AI and a more sort of cyber security kind of aspect? Because if we've got all these random softwares with random logins, are we going to have to see a big shift in the market to better apply to GDPR or security policies? And we can't just let everyone just buy whatever software they want.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot more. I mean, certainly depending on the size of company you're at, there is a lot more regulation now and a lot more compliance. There's a lot more focus on mobile device management, when people bring other devices to work. So yes, I mean, all of these things, all the regulations, all the compliance regulations are forcing companies to kind of get their act together. But the reality is there's still free will amongst the employees who still kind of do these shadow projects and rogue projects. But companies are trying to rein it in, for sure.
Yeah. Do you think we'll see a slowdown a little bit into B2B purchases because of that?
No, I just think, we saw a slowdown because of the economy where, tech budgets were more under scrutiny and people are more considered. We saw more people in buying groups, more senior people getting involved in purchasing reviews. But I think, that I'm not really seeing kind of a core slowdown. In fact, if anything, I think the more kind of new disruptive technologies that come along, like the security field, there have been a lot of great innovations in that field in the last few years, and you've seen companies like Wiz, become overnight massive successes. So I think there are always going to be innovators who are doing cool things that drive new adoption, but there are these pressures for companies to kind of get their act together and regulate what's happening.
So my last question before I open it up to the room is going to be, what do you see the next big trend being, seeing as you have such a great insight into software as a service, B2B software as a service? Is there something you're seeing that you feel like maybe not everyone else is seeing? Different vantage point, maybe?
If I had that information, I'd be trading on it right now. I don't think anything beyond what we've already discussed. Obviously, the AI trend is massive, and again, clearly in the first innings. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. I mean, you see a lot of traditional legacy enterprise software companies like Salesforce and ServiceNow embracing AI in a huge way. You mentioned Intercom earlier. They've kind of rebuilt themselves around sort of an AI platform. I think this whole AI arena is going to be just super interesting to watch in terms of who the winners are.
I maybe I do have another follow-up question on that, because you mentioned ServiceNow. Like my company Array is in the no-code space. So places like ServiceNow and Workday were really giving a lot more control. I think maybe what Power Apps was meant to be. So we're still seeing a big growth in that area of no-code and self-serve.
Yeah.
Or are we finding that people weren't really interested in that all along?
No-code has definitely been a big growth area on our platform. I'm not sure. I mean, it's been around as a concept for a while now, but it's certainly still growing very fast.
Love it. Right, I'm going to open it up to questions. I'm going to pass the mic around. Has anyone got any questions? One, I don't know if you can help me. Make sure it's passed around.
I have one.
Yeah?
I'm dying to ask. I mean, you talked about your whole development of the previous company. When you went to launch this, how did you determine who your initial cadre would be? Were these people, you got the band back together from a previous company, or what did you?
For the second company?
Yeah.
Yeah, my initial team, yeah, absolutely. So the CTO at my first company, I recruited him to join this company as my CTO. And then one of the key engineers that he recruited from Tivoli here in Austin, we recruited like 3 or 4 really amazing engineers from there because he had worked there. That guy, Jeff, joined us as well. Early on, I knew that I needed I have an engineering degree, but I have no idea how to program, right? So having the right engineering talent on the team early on was just super critical. And then one of the guys who joined me early on to kind of build kind of the content side of our platform was, again, someone who'd worked for me at my last company. I think the early crew is certainly, people that you worked with before and can trust is essential. But I think when you do it a second time round, your pattern recognition for making good hires is so much better. So I often talk about hit rates, like when you hire 5 people at a startup, how many survive? My batting average for Convio in the early days before Nickel joined was pretty poor. I probably 1 in 5, 2 in 5 were good hires. But by the time, a few years into it, you start to learn what to do and what signals to look for and how to hire well. And by the time I did my second company, as I know there are a lot of serial entrepreneurs in this room, it gets way easier to spot talent and to.
Next level of leadership, even on the second company, because you mentioned previously that first company you had a struggle with learning that leadership curve, right?
Yeah.
So clearly you're a better leader at that point.
Yeah.
Experience. But you're also the CEO doing all the things you're doing. Are you delegating it to somebody even at the early stage?
Yeah, I think you naturally learn to delegate, through experience and as you scale. But the caliber of the people you hire has a huge bearing on your comfort level in delegating. I think, at least for me personally, and maybe some of the entrepreneurs would comment on this, I have anxiety if I don't trust what's happening in an area. And then my tendency, which isn't a good management tendency, is to dive in. right? Get my hands on around a problem. That's just who I am. I'm a problem solver. When I've got a really strong leader in that area, I don't need to do that, right? So I think hiring well allows you to be a better delegator, right? If you hire mediocre, then you're always going to be second guessing not just the decision you made, but how that function is operating. And it's not good for the person you've hired. It's not good for you as well. So ironically, I think this is a continuous journey as entrepreneurs. There's always, I think any kind of like person who's done something from raw ground startup, there is sort of this internal tendency to always want to innovate and do better and to optimize. But I think one of the things I've had to learn is to pick my battles and only focus on the things that are really needle movers versus, okay, I can accept things operating less than I would like them to be in an area because I realize that it's not the most important battle to pick right now, and because the people in that area are working on something bigger, right? So that's one of the things I've had to personally learn. One of the biggest leadership growth elements for me in the last 2 years was hiring a really strong CRO who frankly kicked me out of the sandbox. I love to sell. I think a lot of entrepreneurs love to sell. I love being on calls with customers, etc. And I hold a high bar in terms of what I expected from our customer success team, etc. And he basically pushed me out of the box and said, you need to go do other things. You can't be here. I've got this. And if you stay involved, you're going to demoralize the team because you're too hands-on. So I think sometimes growth comes by other people telling you need to grow, and as well as internally as well. I listened. I wasn't stubborn. I listened to his feedback, but it took him kind of telling me that my actions weren't being as constructive as possible.
You are the right person.
Yeah.
Yes. At a C-level, he should be able to push back.
Yeah.
Your job is to support him, not to take direction from you necessarily.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Yeah, maybe a question more on the personal side. You hinted at it from an entrepreneurial journey is 10 years or even longer.
Yeah.
How do you, from a personal perspective, stay motivated? It's, as you said, it's grit. It's mostly shit that you're dealing with day in, day out. So how do you deal with that, not just on a one-off kind of basis, but basically day in, day out? And maybe a couple of tips of things that you do on a daily basis or on a weekly basis that help you with that.
Marry the right person so you have a support network, right? And then, it's a journey, right? A lot of people are fixated on the end point, right? You got to enjoy yourself along the way. I actually love what I do. Yes, it can be a grind sometimes, but generally it's not, actually. I love the problems that we're working on. And when you grow a business like this over a decade, there are so many different inflection points, right? In terms of how the business evolves. Just to give the TrustRadius story, like we bootstrapped for a year and we were really trying to solve the problem of how do you get people to author something of quality and not something crappy. And that's actually a surprisingly difficult problem. And then the second problem was, how do you scale, right? So the first 300 reviews on TrustRadius were me going to places like Bazaar Voice and interviewing, maybe, Nikhil, were you one of the people I interviewed? I can't remember. Interviewing people who use software and ask them about what software they used and handwriting reviews. I mean, you do non-scalable, stupid things just to kind of get something off the ground. Yeah. But then the question was, how do we drive traffic and audience? And then the question was, how do you monetize? And actually, only this year we've really nailed monetization. We were kind of like, okay, but we found this new kind of offering earlier this year that has made the company kind of go like this. And what that really means is, if you're a problem solver, there are new problems to solve along the way, and it's super interesting. And also, at this scale now, we're not massive, 62 people, but because I've got such a good leadership team, I'm way out of the details, and I'm only focused on really strategic, needle-moving things, which are really interesting, like big strategic partnerships, charting the company's path to an exit, etc. So I find that really interesting. I found it interesting as well. But you also can't just be a workaholic and not enjoy yourself along the way. You've got to find time to recuperate, to relax, to travel, to enjoy your life. You don't want to have delayed gratification in life. So my moral, someone asked me the other day who did an interview, they were kind of asking me about my approach versus this competitor, G2, that I've raised 25 million, but I'm profitable and I'll grow 60% this year. We'll generate 15% of EBITDA. We're doing really well on metrics. My competitor raised $250 million. They're bigger, but they've got this massive amount of capital they have to pay back before they can, drive an exit. And I'm like, I would rather be the hare than the tortoise. I mean, the tortoise than the hare, right? I joke that I'm the tortoise that sometimes that gets on a skateboard with rockets on them sometimes, because I like to go fast sometimes, but I'd rather kind of like pace myself and be methodical around how I solve a problem in my business, but also, that applies to life, right? You got to enjoy yourself along the way. You can't delay that great vacation you want to go on, or that, the other things are important to you. You've got to enjoy your life along the way. And so for me, I love what I do. I couldn't see myself working for anyone else. I like being, the guy at the helm, and I like, taking things from zero to something. And so for me, it's always been much more upside and pleasure than grind.
I have actually two questions for you. So first of all, I really appreciate all the insights you've had, especially about being risk averse, the early part of your career, and switching over. Can totally relate. And a huge fan of TrustRadius, by the way. Being a B2B software buyer, I usually go to TrustRadius to find unbiased reviews. So thank you. First question is product market fit. So B2B and B2C are completely different beasts.
Yeah.
Especially on the product market fit journey, what were the differences and how did you kind of find that you got product market fit, especially in the B2C side of things?
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to figure out when you got product market fit on the B2B side.
Yeah.
The B2C is much harder. So what was your experience with that?
So I think product market fit is a continuum, not a binary thing. So we started with this concept of knowing that people struggle to get transparent information on products, and we would curate, again, those high quality reviews and give people the content they were interested in. And the markers of success were engagement rates, how we ranked in Google, because Google's sort of a feedback mechanism, right, in terms of whether you're providing high quality content, and then also our effectiveness in converting consumers to contributors, because if we gave them intrinsic value, they'd be more motivated to do that. So we looked at those markers. What we realized over the years was reviews are valuable, but they're not everything. You need to give people other things, pieces of information. So we added pricing data, security data, demos, and all these other things to kind of try and be a one-stop shop. And then the market for success was, again, mainly engagement and traffic. But also we would do intercept surveys with people, and then we did an annual study of 2,000 people where we went really in depth to kind of understand. We would do qualitative interviews as well with buyers. And there's a lot of really cool technologies now that you can use to kind of just track people's journeys and put questions, in front of them at the right time when they're doing certain tasks as well. But ultimately, or even just asking the simple NPS question of the buyer, right? Would you return? How much value did you get? Would you recommend this to someone? So that's how we kind of looked at things on the consumer side. I would say we're still far from done over there, right? I mean, I think we have good content, but I feel like the site could have better UX and better layout. There's a lot of things that people don't know exist that do exist. And then the problem I'm trying to solve right now is, how do you connect people to have human connections beyond reading content? Because I fundamentally believe that in B2B, you're not going to make a decision just by reading a review. You want to talk to people. And there are a lot of communities that enable kind of back channel references, but I believe we can do a better job of that by doing it truly at scale. I mean, you would Stack Overflow? Okay, so you understand the importance of peers helping peers, right? But I think there's a human side to it that goes beyond just, again, written content to actually enabling human-to-human conversations. And then trust has been a big factor in the last few years. AI has led to huge rates of fraudulent reviews. Two of my competitors, there was an independent study that said that 40% of the reviews on those sites are fake due to AI. And so we've done a lot of work to try and quash that problem and really regulate it. So again, a more succinct answer is you're never done with product market fit because the market's changing and it's not binary, it's a continuum. And then secondly, you just have to be continuously kind of either defining metrics and markers of success and having kind of that feedback, qualitative and quantitative methods of understanding if you're hitting the mark or not. On the B2B side, honestly, I didn't think I had product market fit until this year, and I'm 10 years in, right? I was generating revenue, we were growing, but it wasn't taking off like this. And to your point, it's a lot easier to know when you have PMF on the monetization side because the revenue and the retention rates kind of tell you how you're doing. But it's actually incredibly hard to find product market fit, right? A lot of times as entrepreneurs, we stumble across something that feels okay, and it's sort of medium product market fit, but it still feels like they're headwinds and everything feels just too difficult. That's the grind point role I think you're talking about when you haven't nailed product market fit. And we're getting there now. I wouldn't say we fully nailed it, but our business feels very different just as of this year because of a key change we made in terms of a new service we introduced and a new monetization strategy. And the truth is, it's really hard. It's really hard, and it's not a linear journey.
Awesome. And then second one, very quickly, there was a great discussion about the consolidation piece, right? So best in breed versus being a monolith, and having the pressure of like adding additional SKUs and really kind of becoming that outreach, sales loft, gong kind of universe, right? How do you manage that pressure of like staying true to your identity that we want to be the best in breed, and we want to be a leader in that?
It's a great question. I mean, I think constrained optimization can solve a lot of problems, right? When you are really disciplined about spending and expense management and your kind of financial metrics, it forces certain behavior. Now it can force a negative situation where you're under-investing, which is possible, and I've often wondered whether I'm under-investing when I have a competitor that's raised 10 times as much as me. But it also forces a lot of rigor in terms of, and a culture where people, say, is this investment really worth it? I had a call with my CTO earlier today, and I was asking him, we're about to sign this hopefully game-changing deal. I was like, do you need more engineers? And he's like, actually, no, I don't, right? Because when you're in a resource-flowing free environment, people will grab resource, whether they need it or not sometimes. But when you've got a culture that's really disciplined and you've ingrained that in your team, it's kind of a beautiful thing then, because it happens naturally across the team where people are only asking for resources when they really need them. There was a mantra I used to say that you almost need to feel the pain before you hire, right? You almost need to do that job that you're hiring for before you hire for that job. And I think with teams, you almost want to let them feel a little bit of pain before you add that capacity. Did I answer your question? Okay.
So you've kind of touched a little bit on, you've mentioned a couple times now about the competitor who's raised a bunch of more money than you have.
Yeah.
And as a finance nerd and entrepreneur myself, I'm always quite interested in the decision making that other entrepreneurs make when it comes to capital structure and these financial decisions. And so you said your first company, you actually took it public.
Yeah.
And then it was acquired. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs look at that as one of those, either of those is an exit, right?
Yeah.
And not both of them are an exit.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how that played out. And then as sort of a part two to that, I heard you say that you bootstrapped the second company, and one would think that...
Bootstrapped it for a year before raising capital.
Before raising capital. So you did raise, okay.
Yeah.
So just the thought process as you navigate that, coming out of an exit into bootstrapping and how all that went.
Yeah, I think we're all a product of our histories and our lessons learned. So with my first company, while we had a great exit, we did take along about 40 million prior to the IPO, another 40 40 to 60 at the IPO. It was a relatively small cap IPO back then. All right, we wouldn't be able to go public by standards these days. We were sub 100 million in revenue. But, there was a fair amount of dilution along the way from that capital raising, right? Where, while I did okay, I did fine, the lesson that I kept thinking to myself was, what if I'd retained more? What if I'd just controlled things differently? I wasn't as disciplined as I should have been in terms of spending capital. And so when starting the second company, I was like, I want to bootstrap this for a year for two reasons. One is to build that discipline of like, don't spend before you're ready to. And also, one of the downsides of raising capital too early is you're then committed, right? And as an entrepreneur, your most precious asset is your time. And if you go raise $5 million, it's really hard to give it back and say the idea isn't working. But if you've bootstrapped and something isn't working, it's easier to kind of like shut it down or pivot. And so that was part of my thinking as well. It's like, I want to know that there's something here before I commit and take someone else's capital. Because it's really hard to kind of like, people do it, but it's much harder to kind of like retrench at that point.
Can I ask us to wrap up our Q&A unless we have one more question? I wanted to ask one final question.
Chris?
Get the mic there.
Very simple. I understood this whole interview because I'm a tech nerd, but you guys threw around a bunch of tech words. Was anyone else listening to this being like, what the heck are they even talking about? No? Okay.
Some of the specific companies maybe, but
Yeah.
overall, I think we got most of it, I think.
Okay. We're talking a bit about different companies and PPC and PMF and that kind of thing.
We just wanted acronyms.
Yeah. So my last question was, can you just explain in like simple language, what was Convio and what is TrustRadius today?
Convio was an online fundraising platform. Mm-hmm. We help charities use the internet to be more efficient and effective at raising money, communicating with their constituents, and actually doing political advocacy as well.
Great.
We served about 3,000 nonprofits, a lot of the very largest nonprofits in this country, to help them really use technology. And Nikhil ran our professional services and customer success organization. TrustRadius, we help people buy software more confidently. So we give them all the information they need from an independent source based upon real peer advice to help them feel confident that they're making a good choice. We work with brands to help them engage in-market consumers. So instead of, most tech companies serve a very vast market, right? They have a large ideal customer base. It could be in the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions. Only 5% of those companies are buying at any time. So marketing is inherently inefficient if you're targeting all 100% of those companies all the time. We help them engage active buyers on our platform who are in market shopping. We help them create content that is that invokes trust and confidence in their products when they use that content in their own channels. And we provide data and services to help them pinpoint who is shopping and spend their money there instead of casting a wide net. So we create massive efficiencies in terms of how they do demand generation.
Great. Excellent. All right. Well, I'm going to hand this back to you. And
Just want to say thank you, man.